Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic, let's do it. Who have died and been resuscitated? What did you see when it happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I had a near-death experience in which I was ejected from an automobile. When I regained consciousness, a man came to me and said everyone survived. The man was there before any paramedics arrived. The craziest part of it all was that looking at the man gave me the most powerful sensation of deja vu ever. Maybe I hit my head too hard, but it was an insane experience. It was as if I had seen that man before. I attempted suicide a few years ago by hanging myself with an extension cord. I had no pulse when the police arrived, but nobody's really sure how long I was up there. I was resuscitated in the ambulance, but was in a coma for a little under 2 weeks. Anyway, all I remember is a feeling similar to general anesthesia once I jumped off the table. But for the 5 seconds before it went black, I was in total panic and had a total change of heart from the confidence in my decision to end it seconds before. And then it was just nothing, like a deep sleep. And when I finally awoke from the coma, it was like finally reaching the surface of a pool after diving too deep. I was in the same panic that I was immediately after I jumped from the table. Like I just blinked instead of being knocked out for 2 weeks. So to answer your question, I don't remember anything at all. It was like being in a deep, dreamless sleep. Perhaps if I regained consciousness immediately after being resuscitated, I'd remember something more interesting, but yeah, nothing is about all I can offer. My former football coach had a heart attack on the field and was dead for 15 minutes. We were talking to him and someone finally asked him what was like to be dead. He replied by saying that he remembers a whole lot of nothing. He didn't have amnesia or anything. There was nothing around. He did say it was the most peaceful moment of his life. Going off this, I kinda think it's like Inception, where you build the world that you inhabit. When I was 8, I learned how to fix small engines. That being said, my dad had an old flathead Briggs & Stratton 5.5 horsepower engine that didn't work. He also had a riding lawnmower that had no engine nor blades. He gave me the task of getting the engine running. I could put it on the riding lawnmower and have fun whenever. I was so anxious at school the next day. Well, that day I tore apart the motor and had it running by bedtime. The next day we had the thing mounted and were riding around. Flash forward a few weeks, and I and my older sister were out riding when my shoelace got caught on the back spindle. It pulled me off and was dragging me, mind you, only going as fast as it would go. My sister stopped and went in reverse, which caused her to go right onto me. The chain and chain wheel caught my lower right back, ripping my skin open and pulling my large and small intestines out, severing my right lung, breaking my spine in 2 places, and shredding my white kidney. I felt the thing roll onto me, then everything went blank. Couldn't see, move, speak, or anything. No pain as well. All I remember was the blackness. After my father got my heart beating again, I remember lying there in pain. I also remember feeling my back and short of breath. I felt what I still believe as my stomach in my hand while I was feeling my back. Once I was in the ambulance, everything went blank. Except this time I saw myself lying there, and the medics shocking me. I felt a hard pull, and I was back in myself. A few minutes later, I was on a table with strangers in white all around me. I remember them in a panic, then standing next to my grandmother, who passed when I was 3. She told me she was my Nana. We were there watching them jolt my heart with tiny round paddles. She kept telling me it was okay. They called my death time at 6:06 p.m. Then all of a sudden I wake up and I'm all fixed and stapled up. My parents told me I died 3 times, the first for 5 minutes, the second was for a little more than 12 minutes, but the last time was astonishing to the doctors. My heart stopped beating for 20 minutes. My parents made them continue jolting my heart. They told the doctor keep telling them that I was going to have a 98% chance of being brain dead. I'm 25 years old and am healthy as ever. I'm fully capable of walking as well. I was stabbed in the stomach with a fillet knife by my schizophrenic uncle when I was 15 years old. I remember freaking out, lying on the floor, hyperventilating while I was bleeding out. I had tried to crawl up from the basement to phone 911, but I was so weak and every time I moved, I started bleeding harder. I remember passing out and having the sensation like I was leaving a dark room and moving outside into the sun. I stopped panicking, and this feeling of pure contentment settled over me. I was floating over a garden where all of the plants were giving off light, and I could see a huge amorphous shape above me that was made up of every color in existence, including colors I have never seen before and couldn't possibly describe. The shape seemed familiar, like I was part of it, and it was beckoning to me and filling me with pure ecstasy and understanding as I looked at it. Then a man who looked an awful lot like Dream from the Sandman comics, which I was obsessed with at the time, walked over to me through the garden and told me that I couldn't go home yet, that it wasn't time. I started weeping, but I was filled with a feeling of understanding, like I knew that I had to go back despite not wanting to. The man had tears streaming down his face, and he took my hand and led me back to my body, which was in an ambulance. My older brother had found me and called 911. 4 years later, I had experienced a kind of weak flashback or replay of the feeling that I had looking at the giant shape in the sky while I was on psilocybin mushrooms. It felt like I was intimately connected to every aspect of the universe, and that all things that could be known were understood intuitively in that state, like an all-encompassing answer to some divine question. But I couldn't put it into words or symbols of any sort. It was all so obvious in the moment. I felt omniscient and omnipresent, but it was a shadow of the feeling I had during my near-death experience. I didn't have any religion in my upbringing, and I've never been inclined to believe in any sort of organized spirituality. But those two experiences were so vivid and otherworldly that they have convinced me that there are dimensions to existence that are beyond our current ability to grasp in a tangible scientific way. It felt like I had pressed my face up against some sort of veil and looked through a pinhole at something beyond imagining. People have told me that it was all just a simple product of brain chemistry and that there's nothing spooky about my experience, but I honestly have trouble taking them seriously because none of them had actually experienced anything like it. I challenge anyone to have an experience like this and not come away highly skeptical about our current scientific worldview. There seems to be this undercurrent of feeling among some that we are rapidly approaching a comprehensive and objective view of reality, that science is in its twilight years and we are just trying to tie up some loose ends. But my experience has led me to believe that the cosmos is much more mysterious than anyone but the most original thinkers are giving it credit for. I hung myself with my dog's leash almost a year ago. All I remember is letting go of the leash since I was holding on to it and just hanging there for like a minute. It wasn't enough of a shock, like stepping off of a chair, so I was suffocating, and time just seemed to slow down. I felt my heartbeat in my arms and legs and felt it start to fade. I remember what I've come to call the big empty in my therapy groups at just plain nothingness. It's hard to describe, and some people in this thread have managed it quite well, but my description would be a void. There's no darkness, there's no you, there's nothing. It's such a complete lack of anything at all that it can't even, be described as empty, because that would imply it could be filled with something. It's hard to even realize that it exists, because you can't even really perceive it. A near-death experience like mine, I think, is like peering at the void but not going in. Just enough life left to know it's there and not enough death to be engulfed and completely extinguished by it. My nosy neighbor apparently witnessed me through the window, broke said window, and cut me down within 10 minutes. I was out for 3 days afterwards, but I have since fully recovered and finished my inpatient and outpatient program with the Youth Services Bureau and have completely turned my life around. The fear of the big empty still haunts me, knowing that I will have to face it again one day and lose. Nothing at all, really. It's much like a deep sleep. I do remember the shock of being resuscitated. It's just like boom. You take the single most painful gasp of air as your eyes burn out from the halogen lights in the hospital. You look up and see a bunch of people in white hospital masks. You're manic and panting for air as the nurses and doctors hold you down to keep you from jumping up and ripping out the IV. Absolutely nothing. When I was 14, I had to undergo an MRI. They inject you with a radioactive iodine isotope to make it show up better. Apparently, I'm allergic to that. Just before they put me in the machine, they said, "Don't move." I replied, "Hold on, my back itches." I'm told my back looked like a 3D topographical relief map of the Himalayas. That's when I stopped breathing. They immediately put some concentrated liquid Benadryl into my IV, and I could feel it start to move around my body before I blacked out. I know I will die again someday. I truly hope I don't suffocate again. That is a very scary way to go. I was dead for almost 2 minutes, according to the doctors. My mom was very freaked out. My aunt had an experience like this when she was 18. She always suffered from chronic seizures that made her pass out. One day she had one while no one was around. She was later found by my grandmother. The doctors luckily arrived in time to resuscitate her. She explained that she was in the brightest, most peaceful hallway. She wandered aimlessly through it until she found a massive door closed on one end. She told my grandmother that she tried as hard as she could to open the door. Tapping, slamming, and even kicking it would not allow the door to break free. She looked back to see the back of the corridor gone, replaced with an emergency room. She was lying on a stretcher while multiple nurses or doctors were frantically working to revive her. She gave up on the door, turned around, and led to the surgery room. She inevitably reached the room and re-entered her body. She passed away at the age of 42 about 9 months ago, heart failure after multiple seizures. She left behind 2 young daughters and a husband. We like to think that the door opened for her. Growing up, my father used to tell me of an experience he had while having an open heart surgery. The doctors had to stop his heart for about 20 to 30 minutes while they inserted a mechanical valve into his heart. At one time, he was in his early 20s and was involved in a lot of bad activity that he says he's ashamed of now. Anyway, while my dad was dead, he said he was in a very dark place. And as he wandered around, he started running into very scary people who were deformed and screaming at him. He ran for his life into a corner and hid. And just before the people got to him, he looked up and saw his deceased grandmother reach her hand down and grab him. The next thing my dad remembered, he was back in the hospital. He's convinced he was temporarily in hell. I don't know if this was just a dream state or something, but I've never seen my dad so convinced in his life. It was enough for him to turn his life around and turn to religion and, more importantly, come back to his family that he had left behind. A lot of people shared their experiences today, and I think there's a pretty decent balance between those who saw relatively nothing but blackness and those that had these, well, they explained it, but otherwise unexplainable, incomprehensible experiences. To be critical of either, I think, is short-sighted, because that individual experienced what they felt was real, so it's hard to pass judgment, though I do like the people who did opt to keep an open mind. I think we could all benefit from that. Not me, but a friend of mine overdosed one day while doing some stuff with his friend. The friend hadn't done anything yet, so he wasn't imagining all of the signs of death on this guy. No pulse, cold skin, blue lips. My friend told me that those few minutes he was considered dead, he was nothing but white. Everything around him was bright white, and in the distance was a dark, shadowed tree. He then saw a woman, also dark and shadowed, so he wasn't able to see her face, but her presence made him happy. She held out her hand to him, and for a while, he debated whether or not he should go with her. He decided not to, and she simply walked away. Then he woke up again. Before that event, he defined himself as Catholic, but was never really religious. Afterwards, he turned his life around and started devoting himself to helping others. When I was 12, I drowned in the Gulf of Mexico, America. I was out pretty far from my family, and the current picked up into a rip. I had always been a very strong swimmer, and I knew what to do, swim parallel. On this occasion, I wore myself out and started to sink beneath the water. I remember struggling to breathe, then I took a big breath of water and everything stopped. The only way I can describe it is by saying it was being at zero. I wasn't scared or excited. I was just zero. I was looking through the water, and I blacked out. During that time, my mother was swimming out to me. She had been a surfer all her life and pulled me to shore and gave me CPR until I coughed up water. There was something eerily comforting about being at zero. My friend went hiking with his family and he fell a few feet off a cliff they were climbing and he hit the back of his head on a rock. They called an ambulance, and when they finally arrived at the hospital, he was pronounced dead. He had no heartbeat or any brainwaves. They were already unplugging everything and moving on with all the paperwork when he suddenly woke up. The nurse screamed, "He's awake!" And then chaos ensued all over again. He was dead for about 7 minutes, and he says the entire time he was lying down fully conscious in a really dark room. He calls it a room, but doesn't really know. He said he couldn't tell how long it was, but that suddenly he heard a sound like if someone snapped their fingers next to his ear, and then he woke up in the hospital. The experience didn't make him religious either. I saw a field with trees on both sides. I could see water. I felt like there was an ocean on one side of the path. If you can imagine the fields that electrical lines go through, where there are no residents and they just clear the area for the power lines, it was like that. There was a tree in the middle and a well-worn path around it. I was walking the path. It looked like an oak tree. It was very large, and presence came to walk with me. I told it that I was ill and that this seemed like a nice place. The entity, I'm non-religious so I don't know what it was, told me that I was not done and that I should return, that I would be happy one day. It was so peaceful and beautiful, but the forest seemed dark and scary. The trees on both sides seemed a place I did not want to go. I only wanted to go toward the water. Then I saw a bright light and I woke up in the ICU. I hope this doesn't turn into some kind of religious debate or some kind of medical versus spirituality thing. This was my experience. Take it as that. My sister was shot while she was walking her dogs in our small town in Alaska. The bullet ricocheted around, piercing her bowels in 9 places. Even though we had one of the best Rhodes Scholar docs in the north at our ER and the only flight out of town was miraculously minutes away from takeoff and held up to fly her to Anchorage, she bled out and died on the operating room table. She knows because she vividly remembers everything the surgeon said as she lay dead on the table. What she told me later is remarkable. She recalls drifting up and into a very bright light. She was no longer in pain and felt compelled to travel into brilliance. It led to an amazing river. Seriously, the look on her face when she describes this place helps me realize that radiant, endless joy is not just a possibility, but an eventuality. She describes playing in a river that consisted of pure knowledge. Anything she ever wanted to know was at her fingertips. As she played in this amazing river, she could sense figures on the distant shore. They were our people, she explained, our family, our animals. All are waiting patiently for her to finish playing in the river and wade toward them on the shore. Though she was not ready to leave the marvelous river, she knew without being told that they would wait patiently and joyfully, but she never made it to the shore. As she was playing, an amazing thing happened. Seriously, people, if you could see the look on her face when she describes this next part, you would laugh for pure joy. A being approached her. She did not know what it was except to describe it as pure, unconditional, ebullient love. It radiated love. It pulsated love. And all things diminished before the radiance of that love. The next part makes me chuckle a bit, even though that seems out of place. She said it spoke to her and said that she had to go back, that it wasn't her time. She said like a little kid, but I don't want to. When she recounts this experience, she emphasizes that to be in the proximity to that being is all there is. She describes it as a completion, a peace, a welcoming. To leave was incomprehensible, but to decline was also incomprehensible. She felt infused with a purpose. Very, very, very reluctantly, she returned to life. She's amazing. They patched her femoral artery and explained that the graft would eventually give. In all probability, she'll die within minutes. Living with the sword of Damocles should be terrifying. No, to her it's a promise that she'll get to return. Life is what we're here to do, she explains, but after, sweet, benevolent, all-encompassing love. With every single breath, my sister is heartbeats from death, and I have never met anyone who is more alive. Fearless. If you're looking for a more religious viewpoint, I'd like to be on the other side of some of the comments here and say that if a higher power did have a plan for you, and you were meant to die as part of your life experience, then that same power could simply decide that you aren't meant to see what's beyond the veil of mortality just yet. and that could explain why many saw nothing, as they weren't meant to. I guess that goes against the standard Reddit there is no God ideal that pretty well makes up the hive mind around here, but I like to keep an open mind and accept possibilities, even in the face of overwhelmingly contradictory evidence. I don't claim to have any of the answers you're looking for, or to know anything about the afterlife with any certainty, as I don't directly associate myself with any one religious group in particular, instead choosing to accept that I do not know and ponder the infinite possibilities, none of which can be said to be the one true answer. Could there be no God? Yes. There may not be. Could there be one? Is it possible? Yes, it certainly is, but no one can say with any true certainty until they've died. For good, that is. That any answer is the right answer. Anyone that claims to have those answers cannot comprehend the immensity of what they don't know. I OD'd on some sleeping pills when I was young and stupid and heartbroken. I hadn't thought much about the consequences of what would happen afterwards, except I wouldn't feel this overwhelming pain anymore. The shock of the absolute nothingness I experienced for a few moments brought me enough strength to crawl back to town and get taken to the hospital. The 5 or so minute ride to the hospital was me fighting it with everything I had, and every time I slipped over, the horribleness of it made me fight just a little harder. I was too exhausted to fight it once I got to the hospital. A preacher read me my last rites, and I was out. Luckily, I woke up a couple of days later. I've been worse off emotionally a few times since then, but suicide never crossed my mind. There are no emotional troubles that are as awful as the sliver of nothingness I felt. My life is great now, and I'm so thankful I'm alive. I've experienced so many great things since then. I can't believe I ever thought I had nothing to live for. When I was coming to, which took a couple days, I hallucinated my best friend trying to get me into trouble by making me get out of bed and seeing a little mouse in the corner of the room, which I kept trying to capture. My friend is still alive, and I don't have a special connection to mice. It felt very real, but obviously I was hallucinating. I can see how someone might hallucinate about things like deceased relatives and mistake their visions for something more than brain malfunction. So as far as changing my views on religion, I was fairly skeptical beforehand, but deep down hoped angels would whisk me away. Afterwards, I'm pretty sure this life on Earth is all we've got. My heart was stopped for a short time following a car accident. I woke up in the operating room and then was in a coma for 2 weeks after that. I saw nothing. It was exactly like being asleep. The interesting bits are what you feel when dying. Your body is dumping all of its wonderful chemicals and time slows down from the adrenaline or whatever. I saw the truck hop the median. I saw the car spinning like a carnival ride, which felt at least like 30 seconds when in reality, my car only turned less than 1 full turn. DMT is a hell of a drug, but the being dead part isn't interesting or any sort of religious experience. Luckily, you can't remember what pain feels like. In retrospect, this experience is a lot more interesting than it was at the time. It's a lot like being high, in that your priorities are shifted really strangely while you're in it. I didn't care that I was so effed up so much as that was cutting off my pants or that I had $10 in change in the ashtray that I didn't want whoever recovered my car to steal. A man came and spoke to one of my classes this semester about his near-death experience, and it gave me great comfort, so I wanted to share it here. He was kayaking with a friend and ended up flipping his and being sucked under by the current. He was sucked into a pipe underwater and struggled to get out, almost made it, and was sucked back in. He passed out, and his friend saw his lifeless body being tossed down the river. This is how he described his experience in the moments he was unconscious. He was in a dark place, almost like a cave, only the walls were soft and velvety. At the end of this cave was a beautiful kaleidoscope of colors. He made it sound similar to a stained glass window, and on the other side of this colored glass, dark figures were passing by. He said that all sense of time was lost, and it felt like his wife and kids would come join him at any minute. He said it was like the most comforting and peaceful feeling he's ever experienced. He said that he had the strong sense that God wanted him and everyone there badly, and that you must have to do something pretty terrible to go to hell, because he wasn't the greatest of guys before this. His friend was able to catch up to his body and revive him, and he said now he feels a stronger connection with everyone and is grateful to have had this experience. Hope this was calming to some of you like it was to me. Some of the posts on here are pretty scary. I kicked it, then came back. The how does not matter, but what does is what I saw in the interim. As cliche as it may seem, I saw a brilliant light and walked into it. Inside I saw my childhood home and my recently departed grandmother. We talked a while, and then she asked me a question that hit me like a ton of bricks. Are you doing something that matters with your life? When I was resuscitated, I came back in abject panic, but the most pressing thing that was in my mind was the realization that if I had died at that moment, I would have left the world worse off for having me in it. Back then I was a pretty shitty person to a lot of people and caused much more harm than good. After this, I decided to change who I was and make life a little kinder. I now work as a counselor, working with traumatized children who have experienced abuse, and I have never been happier. I guess I just needed to die to be reborn. To answer the religion question, I am still an atheist. I had a powerful experience and can't really explain it, but if I focused on that, I would be wasting my time on daydreams instead of doing what matters, trying to leave the world a little better than what I found it. I wasn't exactly resuscitated, so this is kind of the mark. Oops. Anyway, I broke my neck last summer diving into a pool, and not just any old vertebrae, I broke my C1. That's the one at the very top that connects your spinal cord to your skull. Fun stuff. I've been a lifeguard and competitive swimmer for years, diving into water 3 feet deep for practice without batting an eyelash. This time I was diving into 6 feet water during the break the lifeguard got, nothing crazy or unusual. So I dive in, and the next thing I know, my hands aren't up front where they're supposed to be. And all of a sudden, there's an awful crunching noise. And if you have ever heard sounds underwater, you know how eerie it is. I still cringe thinking about it. The back top part of my head hit the concrete bottom of the pool, and it was like time froze. I remember thinking with perfect clarity, I just died. I just dove in a pool, broke my neck, and died. It was just white everywhere. And I realized that I had died and I was sitting at the bottom of the pool. All of a sudden I hear her think, no. And I think that if I can just make it to the top of the pool, I won't die. And no one can stop me. In my head I'm thinking, I'm not dead. I refuse to die. Then the white is gone, and I'm up at the surface yelling for one of my friends to come help me on the side of the pool. I was under for 2 or 3 seconds tops because no one even realized something was wrong. But for me, it felt like I had been down there a long time. I came up and told him I hit my head pretty bad, and I think I have a really bad concussion. I began laughing on the side of the pool and walk out using the steps, and I'm about to drive myself to the hospital. At this point, my younger sister, who worked with me, said it would be best if she took me. We get to the hospital, they put a brace on me, but I have to send me to a different hospital via ambulance to get a more thorough look at my neck. A couple of hours and x-rays later, the doctor comes in smiling, saying that although I did break my C1 vertebra, I would walk again. Of course, I have had to modify my life and cut out contact sports and running, which has been very, very difficult, but I'm alive and well for the most part. It wasn't an overly religious experience for me, but it kind of showed me who I really was. Rather than go ahead and give up and die at the bottom of that pool, I got to the top knowing that whatever happened next was going to be rough. Near-death experiences don't tell us anything about the afterlife. There's no more mystery or meaning in what one sees when the brain is deprived of oxygen than there is about what one sees when they're dreaming.
There's a reason these are called near-death experiences and not death experiences. If you'd actually died, you'd be dead and unable to report anything. Dying people can be resuscitated. The dead cannot. Death is a process. Your brain does not stop working immediately just because your heart or breathing. It isn't surprising that odd things might be seen or just remembered when you subject an organ that's an oxygen and glucose hungry as the brain to a sudden lack of both. You may remember odd things afterwards, but that doesn't mean they actually happened any more than remembering blacking out means the lights actually went out. My mom's root canal got infected and she died for 5 minutes. She said she saw a river or a darkness like a river, and on the other side were just others. She didn't describe what they looked like, but she knew it was others like her somehow. Then, from behind, someone touched her shoulder and said, "It's not time yet." Then she woke up and would not stop asking who just touched her shoulder. The doctors were all confused and kept saying, "No one touched your shoulder. You were just dead." She became a born-again Christian after that, and is a firm believer in Christ. For some perspective, I'm a full-blown atheist. I believe that what she told me is what she truly believes, but I can't say I believe that what she perceived is an afterlife. The mind sends out all types of chemicals when you're in a situation like that, and it could have been any number of things, but she definitely thinks it was some version of the Christian afterlife. I've been clinically dead twice in my life, once at the age of 2 and again at age 5. Both times my parents told me that I awoke talking about relatives I'd never met and had never been told about, as if I knew them and had met them. It was very odd, they told me. I don't remember any of this, of course, but the weird thing is that ever since these experiences, I've always felt this profound sense of purpose with my life. Like I'm supposed to do something very important. I couldn't tell you what it is, though. Could be something as grand as saving the world, or something as subtle as putting a smile on someone's face. Who knows? But there isn't a day that I wake up not feeling that I have some as yet unknown purpose to achieve. I was gone for a few minutes, and the going out was strangely similar to an Alex Gray painting. All of the things I had seen, like faces and landscapes, converged onto themselves, creating tinier reflections of each other in endless waves until they were so fragmented that everything went black. It was the most peaceful feeling in the world, or out of it, and I was disintegrated into nothing and everything. I don't know who or what gave me the signal, but at some point I was notified that if I didn't start breathing, I would stay there. The scary part is I wanted to. I had never known such satisfaction and oneness, but the love of someone on the other side made me take that first breath. Coming back wasn't the same. It was just all at once. I was just there, confused and hollow feeling. I remember it rained and I cried. It was hard to adjust in my mind because I had never wanted to die before, but being there was so different that what I had thought it would be like. It's true, it was a blackness, but not because it was empty. It was black because there was so much detail and complexity that it was simple. It feels weird to describe now because I have since found a love in being a part of one thread in the blanket again, but I wanted to share because I always thought it was odd that I remembered. I played nose tackle on the football team when I was in high school. During one full-speed scrimmage between the first-string offense and defense, I got caught on a draw play to the left of the center from my perspective. At the time, a middle linebacker followed me into the weakness I thought I found in the offensive line. This meant that there was my 200-pound sprinting forward into an oncoming 180-pound running back with a 170-pound linebacker pushing forward behind me. The running back had gotten much lower than I had and put his face mask straight into my sternum. The combined force of the three of us on my chest led to blunt force trauma of my heart. I immediately had chest pains, but thought I just had the wind knocked out of me. As I stumbled off the field, the head coach yelled at me to get back onto the field. I tried to respond, but couldn't find the air to speak. I tried to remove my helmet, but couldn't find the strength to pry the snaps apart. I made it about 5 feet off the field and collapsed. I lay there on my back for a few seconds before I remembered my friend yelling for the trainer. I still couldn't breathe, and my chest felt like I was having an asthma attack from hell. A few moments later, a junior college-aged kid, the trainer, appeared over me. He took off my helmet and proceeded to ask me a ton of questions. I could barely speak my responses, and then maybe only a word at a time. This may seem odd, but I remember the coach called for a water break during the trainer's line of questioning. From several yards away, well too far to gauge the situation on his own, the coach asked the trainer how I was doing. The trainer said I was fine and just hyperventilating from an acute asthma attack. He asked his assistant to get my inhaler from his office. I lay there on my back with the chest pain that felt like an elephant was sitting on me, at the same time as a knife was cutting me in half. Life seemed to slow down, and everything felt like an eternity. The trainer's assistant returned with my inhaler, and they did their best to give me 2 pumps. I didn't respond to the medicine like the trainer thought I would, and he froze there, kneeling over me. He kept repeating something to himself, but I couldn't hear it. My hearing was fading in and out, and I was only catching bits and pieces. The trainer and his assistant removed my shoulder pads and jersey. Maybe that would help me breathe better. Time seemed to slow down even more, and I felt like I was gulping for air. I had lost all sense of relativity. I don't remember what triggered it, but the trainer called my mom to ask her what she wanted him to do. After he replayed the situation to my mom, she asked him why he was calling her and why he hadn't called 911. I vaguely remember the panicked look on the trainer's face as he sort of asked or told the coach he was calling 911. An eternity passed. The sky was blue. Forever came and went. I couldn't move. More blue sky. It got lonely. I couldn't see anyone anymore. Just sky. No sound, no air. I tried talking, but all that would come out was nonsense. Suddenly, there were paramedics. This is where my memory starts to get really spotty. I'm in an ambulance. It's not moving. Now the ambulance is moving. What's happening? Why am I in an ambulance? The paramedic is talking to me, but I can't hear him. He's moving so fast. He looks nervous. The inside of the ambulance is shaking. Suddenly, whiteness. Bam. Where am I? So white and bright, then dark. Bam. So white and blurry, then dark. Bam. There's a doctor-looking guy, and he's with my mom. They're talking. She's crying. Where am I? I'm in a bed. Is this a dentist's office? Why am I at the dentist? Wait, this is a hospital. Why am I at a hospital? Where was I last? I was whiteness. I was in the whiteness, but where was that? The blue sky? I was looking at the blue sky, but where was that? Why am I here? I'm confused. A nurse came in. She told me to relax and try to remain calm. She was taking blood from an IV port on my wrist. When did I, the guy with a fear of needles, get an IV port? Time goes by, but I have no idea how much. Then another nurse comes in. Maybe it's not a nurse, but some sort of hospital assistant. They're moving me to a room because I'm going to have to stay a while. I'm still so out of it, and everything feels surreal. I fall asleep. When I wake up in my room, my mom is there. She's a nurse at this Kaiser hospital, and she tells me what I missed. I had a type of heart injury that is very rare. Several tests and images were done, and the doctor wants to talk to me about it. I have no recollection of the imaging events. The doctor comes in while my mom is in the room with me. He explains that the type of heart injury I sustained is similar to injuries that were seen in random automobile accidents from the mid-1900s. Basically, my heart sustained an injurious impact right around the moment it was in the valley portion of its beat. If I remember correctly, this is the point when the heart is resting and most vulnerable. The injury caused my heart to slow down and stop. I was dead for about 2 minutes in the ambulance and the ER. The whole time span from when I was injured until I woke up in the hospital room with my mom was about 15 hours. I spent just over a week in the hospital afterwards. This was in 1996. I've since learned that this type of injury was rare, but more common before seatbelts and airbags were regularly used in cars. I passed out in my father's arms and I was still able to hear things. I heard everything while being carried through A&E to the resuscitation ward. I could feel and hear everything but not move, and it was really scary. I felt all the tubes and things being poked into my body and lots of beeping equipment and stuff. It sounded like about 5 to 10 doctors were around shouting and trying to save me. They started talking about all my stats dropping, and I heard them telling my parents I was probably going to die. The heart rate monitor turned to a constant beep, and I heard my mother screaming and squeezing my hand and shaking me. Probably didn't help. I was still in my passed out state, hearing and feeling but not being able to move or talk, for about 3 seconds, until the 2 senses I did have disappeared, and I was in complete darkness for a short while, just with my thoughts. After that short while, I began to hear a kind of blinky noise, a bit like a xylophone. Then lots of little colored lights appeared that were blinking on and off very slowly. It was like I was floating around space, and they were little blinking planets. There was one big white planet that was not blinking, and I felt like I was moving through the other planets toward it. At this point, I'd realized I was dead, and was just thinking about my life and my family and the people that I love. It was really peaceful. I was like that for what felt like hours, until I began to hear my mom and dad again crying, and the doctors telling them I was coming back. Then the easiest way to explain how I got back into my body would be, after you die on Battlefield 3, and you're in the menu choosing a class, then you suddenly get resuscitated by someone else. That is pretty much exactly what it felt like. I was in my body for a short while, in the passed out state again, hearing and feeling, but no sight or movement, until I opened my eyes and saw my parents next to my bed. Then I started to laugh, and would have to have sat up to hug them, but I couldn't move because of all the things I was plugged into. I ended up staying in the hospital for a week and a bit, and missed a few GCSE exams. At first it's nothing. No sound, no wind, no light, no weight. It's like the weight of the world just disappears, and you're in the deep end of the pool just floating there. No matter how far you reach out, you can't grab anything. It isn't cold, it isn't hot, and it isn't painful. It was absolutely nothing, and it felt like I was there for a long time. After a while, there's a flash of light all around me. I felt a small tingle shoot down my body, and I don't know what happened, but I started falling. Like I suddenly just fell from some place high up. It's like when the school bully comes out of nowhere and just shoves you to the ground, or you trust fall onto something and they don't catch you. It was a long fall. The light faded and I was back into the deep end of the pool. After a while longer, I started to see images of myself. I heard nothing, and I only saw me. I don't remember what it was that I did, but it was something important. There's another flash, and I can hear voices. Then it fades away again. I don't know exactly what happened, but I woke up in the hospital with my family next to me. The ambulance staff said that I suddenly woke up after they revived me, walked into the ambulance truck, and went to sleep. The first thing I could say was that my Nana is proud of our family. I was 13 when this happened. Hit by a bus, killed on impact. I was dead for 6 minutes. They almost gave up on me. What was 6 minutes in real time felt longer for me. The weird thing is that I liked it. I felt at peace. There was nothing holding me back and no violence. It was just me, and I liked it that way.